So, hello, I'm Sam. You can catch me on Twitter at the Sam Barnes and post an occasional article at thesambarnes.com. I'm currently the development team manager at Global Personals, where I manage around 20 developers and engineers who work in the in-house development team. I'll let that one play out a little bit, I think. Also known as Global Dev. I also have a cat who can be a bit of a douchebag at times, as you can see. However, her name is Spider Pig, therefore I can always forgive her for being a bit of a douche. But as much as I'd love to stand here and talk to you for an hour about my cats, and I really, really could, I'm actually here to talk to you about something else that I care deeply about, and that's managing clients. So, here's one phase of client management. Cool, calm, unshakable, professional. Not as much hair as I'd like, but you get the idea. Mr. and Mrs. Client, give me your project and I shall deliver it, no problem at all. However, there is another phase of client management. Stressed, tired, hungry, an absolute wreck. Some of you out there are going to know that face of pain. And for those that don't, if you intend to stay in project and client management, you're going to get to know that at some point. But you know how clients can be, right? For years now, they've been people that we've loved to mock, the digital agencies and so on and so on. To understand this, you've only got to look at sites like Clients from Hell, Make My Logo Bigger, an article such as 15 of the craziest client requests ever. And then there's these amazing worst client comments turned into posters. I like it, but can the snow look a little warmer? And this one is brilliant. We need to remove the baby's ear, or at least move it around the side of his head a bit. At least. And now there's even memes, this being a personal favourite of mine. Yeah, a lot of knowing faces out there. However, I've got a confession to make. When I worked at digital agencies, more importantly, had only worked at digital agencies, I laughed and swore at client requests with my colleagues when the client offers something dumb or unrealistic. You know, I have to admit it, I thought a good proportion of clients were pretty stupid. And then it happened. Skip forward a few years, I'm working at a product-based company, I've got no third-party clients, and my boss calls me in, tells me he's got an important project for me to run. The complete redesign and development of our 2 company websites. That's right, I went to the dark side, and I became a client. But I've got 2 more confessions to make. Because I had so much experience at that point delivering digital projects, I admit it, I genuinely thought I would be the best client ever in the universe. In fact, I'll go further than that. I thought the project would be easy. Guess what? Wrong. Oh man, was I wrong. What followed was 6 months of the most mind-bending, karma-ridden, humble pie-eating, vice versa experience of my career to date. Because you know what I found out? Being a client is really hard. The whole experience completely flipped some of my client management fundamentals. And so I thought I'd share 10 things with you today that kind of make up my revised approach to client management, but include lessons that I learned on that tortuous but fascinating journey. So up first, hiring a digital agency. This was the first sort of vice versa moment when I was told to go out, find some agencies, contact them, interview them, ultimately hire one to complete our project. So the pitch process, something I'd done 100 times. Again, I thought it would be easy. Again, I was really wrong. It took so much more effort and was much harder than I could ever imagined. For example, when I used to go to pre-sales meetings, I knew others had probably been there that day. You know, you turn up, you sign in reception, you look down the book, you try and find some local competitors, you spot 1, spot 2, you feel a little bit like James Bond, right? But that was probably the only real thought that I'd ever given to what the client had been up to before I met them. Until being on the other side of the fence, I didn't really appreciate what it was like for the client who had to find and hire a digital agency. Personally, I found it time-consuming, tiring, and mind-numbingly repetitive. And that was for me, someone really interested in this process after I was about to become a client for the first time after 8 years of delivering projects. But for many clients, they're not interested. They're not interested at all. In fact, they find it quite daunting and, to be honest, a bit of a chore. Another example, so to get 5 agencies in, take all the emails you've had back and forth with a client up until the point when you first see them, okay? Think about what they've been up to before they've seen you, okay? This is what I had to do. Took a brief from my boss, created a written brief, found agencies, contacted the agencies, sent the project brief, answered questions about the brief, arranged times people could meet, and obviously got the meeting rooms and confirmations. So, to get 5 agencies in, just a few hours of meetings and research, it took me around 10 emails per agency, so 50 emails in 2 to 3 days. Okay? It's not so bad. Doesn't sound too bad, right? Maybe not. But there's one thing that you may not be considering, and that is that many clients do not have dedicated time for projects. Agencies often forget that the client contact, the person tasked with finding the agency, still has to do their day job as well. It's not only repetitive for them, but by the time you meet them at what we think of as the exciting, the fresh part, it's all new, they're already really busy, they've been through this repetitive process, and they're stressed. And I don't think I ever really thought of that when I was on the agency side. So the real key lesson that I got was to be so mindful of what the client's going through during that process and to really empathise with them. Even to the point where you can weave it into the very beginning of the experience between the client and agency. Turn it into a differentiator if you can. Ask how the client's doing. Offer support of any kind to the client. Be willing to be flexible on meeting times. Find out if they have got dedicated time for this project or not. Because just perhaps at this key stage, you're going to be the only agency who does ask this. And the one agency to empathise with the client about how they're finding this process could just be the one that stands out amongst the crowd. And someone the client might want to work with. So give that a try. Up next, proposals. So you've met the client, and you haven't made a fool of yourself. Good work. And they've asked you to submit a proposal. So off you go with your team, and you spend the next week or so crafting a masterpiece of a document. You send it off, proud of every page. Sometimes you send it off a little later than standard working hours. You know the kind of all-nighters I mean, I'm sure. You get home, straight to bed, before you know it, you've got to wake up, and the morning sun feels a little bit like this. But I've got another couple of confessions to make. When I used to be part of sending proposals, I'd literally fantasise about the client receiving them, opening it, turning every page and just going, wow, this is amazing. Where can I hire these people? Brilliant. The reality tends to be a little bit more frustrating than that. So, you turn up to the meeting, you get to page 1, page 2, especially if there's 5 or 6 people you're presenting to, you just catch out your peripheral. They don't think that you can see them, but you can. They're skipping right through to the end, right to the costing page, and you're just thinking, all that work, all that hard work, waste of time. Then I became a client. At that point, I didn't have dedicated time to this project. I did get it in the end, but not at this point. So I had about 10 proposals to review. So I took them home. Good bit of evening reading. So there I am on my sofa with Spider-Pig and going through them, and suddenly something strange happened. They all started to blur into one. And these were good proposals. These were from good agencies. But they started to blur into one. I was quite surprised. But I admit it, I started to not read every page of these proposals. Anyway, I carried on. I opened what felt like about the 50th proposal, and then it really happened. I committed the ultimate sin. I opened one, and I skipped straight to the costing page. I remember smirking to myself at the time, but also feeling a little bit of shame, to be quite honest, because, I suddenly realised that maybe these clients weren't showing disinterest. Maybe they weren't, maybe they did care as much as me, but maybe they'd just been through the same process I had. I was tired. I was a little bored, to be honest. It was fascinating, really. So out of this did come an idea. Why not turn the ever so common structure of proposals on their head a little bit? And why not put cost first in proposal? Now I know what some of you are thinking, Sam, you, sir, are an idiot. If I put the cost first, especially if it's too high, the client's going to receive it, look at the cost. If it's too high, throw it in the bin, waste of time. But I'd probably have to come back to you at that point and say that if your cost is so high that the client, throws it in the bin, what the hell were you doing in those early meetings? Frankly, if you got to the point where you're about to write a proposal and you don't have a pretty good idea of budget, I'm afraid you're the idiot, okay? You've got to always, always, always find out client budget. Finding out budget is absolutely crucial to ensuring you can provide the best possible service for the client. If you can't articulate to a client why you have to know the budget that early, then you really need to work on those skills, okay? If you can articulate that to a client but they hesitate or refuse, just take that as a bit of an amber flag as to what that client could be like to work with. But let's assume you know the budget, right? Why am I saying to put cost first in the proposal? Again, based on nothing more than my experience as a client, okay? I had lots of good proposals from good agencies, okay? But they were all the same. I don't know about your proposals, but they were all the same. Introduction, a bit of a reiteration of what the problem was, what we're going to build for you, some pictures perhaps, and then at the end, costing, timeline, and so on. And it was this same format that made it very repetitive. Now, I hadn't, again, until I became a client, I didn't really think of that. I didn't really think about what it's like to see 10 agencies within 2-3 days and read 20 proposals over a week. Okay? So, I mean, tradition says to build up the pitch, to draw the person into the sale, get them excited, so that by the time they're at the point of ecstasy, they're going to sign on the dotted line when they see the cost. They won't care about that. But that wasn't my experience as a client. As I say, it didn't really have enough impact the way it was. What I was looking for was something to make me sort of stand up and jolt me out of my zombie reading sort of phase that I was in. And I thought, if there was a proposal that had the cost first, with an attitude of, here's how much we want to charge you, and we're going to spend the next 30 pages justifying exactly why we're worth it, I think that would have really, really stood out to me. And I also think for the people writing proposals, that could alter or help you focus on the proposal a little differently. So for instance, if on page 2, you've asked for 200k, I think you're going to make page 3, page 4, I just think you're going to focus a little bit more on making that a very solid few pages. Okay. Timelines in proposals. So, being a room mostly full of project managers, I'm sure most of you at some time or the other have experienced this. When you get given a project to run that's been sold by somebody else, you sit down with them, you start to get an idea of what the project is, what the scope is, and then you're told what the cost and the timeline is. The conversation and my face often goes something like this. So let me get this right. You've just sold a Facebook replica for £10,000 and a timeline of 8 weeks. This is my face. Again, could just keep watching that. It really should go without saying that overselling is a false economy. Why am I talking about this? Simply because when I was a client, I received some pretty funky timelines back from clients, and some of these clients knew my background, and yet still I received some timelines that were pretty optimistic, I believe is the word. They were impossible. I knew it. And it was clear that they were just following their usual routine of trying to impress the client based on speed with not so much on reality. So you've got to be really wary when agreeing to crazy deadlines, even at the sales stage. It might make clients happy at the time, but you'll really risk putting your team in jeopardy. And ultimately the client and your boss and everyone's going to lose in that situation. Plus, when that happens, I don't know how many of you have experienced this, but when your first job as a PM is to, I believe they say, realign the client's expectations, but really you're saying, that stuff you were sold for that amount of money that we can deliver in that amount of time, yeah, we're going to have to change that around a little bit. It's a really bad way to start a relationship, and I've done it more times than I would like. I've even seen things like, an hour or two after a contract has been signed, the project manager will send over the project timeline, and the file name was this. Like really, 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 really FML indeed. Please don't do that. I know what some of you are probably thinking. Yeah, we know this. We're project managers. We're the realists of our company, but we don't do the selling. So what can I do about overselling? Well, you need to do something. You need to do something. And my suggestion is to get involved in pre-sales. If you're constantly getting handed down projects that have bad scope, bad timeline, whatever it might be, then you need to get involved at the point where these things are happening. So talk to your boss. Talk to whoever's selling it, the account director, the CEO, the account manager, whoever it might be. Talk to them, explain why you want to get involved, show them some facts and figures if you can to justify it a little bit, but do whatever you can to get involved. If you manage to, you're going to learn 2 things. One, that it is possible to kind of readdress that balance slightly at the sales point, which is good for everybody. But 2, you're also going to get a glimpse into the world of sales, okay? And specifically how you can't always sell under ideal conditions, especially if you're at a small company, okay? So, when you have to worry about things like cash flow, paying people's wages, or maybe revenue targets, there's certain things that go into the mindset of someone selling that a lot of PMs aren't always exposed to. Okay? And when I was exposed to this kind of thing, I do think it made me for a sort of a better project manager. And I'd really encourage you all to get involved in pre-sales, but to learn both sides of it. So get involved. Client meetings. Well, there's a million resources out there on client meetings. So I'd just like to suggest 2 things. One practical, and one that's a bit more of an acquired taste, a bit experimental, you could say. So the first tip is to audio record client meetings. So don't get me wrong, I don't go anywhere without my notepad and pen. However, there are some meetings, the long ones, usually at the beginning of a life cycle, where you've got to absorb an awful lot of information. I think Brett talked about this kind of meeting where you've got to put a binding document off of the back of it, and you could be there for a couple of hours, half a day, perhaps even a day, and it's all on your shoulders to absorb this information. Before I started to record these meetings, I'd be in those meetings, taking notes, it's all making sense, get back to the office and realise they make no sense at all. I couldn't read my own writing. For example, that. This is the kind of nonsense that I'm talking about. You know, it looks like the scribblings of a sort of serial killer or something, I'm not quite sure. And these aren't even my notes, this is off Flickr. Right? My notes were worse than this. I'm pretty sure that's an E there, but I couldn't even make that out of mine. To add insult to injury, before I started recording detail-heavy meetings, I would not only be unable to read my notes, but while I was scribbling like a mental case, I wasn't paying full attention to the client. When I'm in a client meeting, I want to give them my full, undivided attention. I want to understand everything they say. I don't want there to be a reason for the conversation to not flow organically. I want to fully immerse myself in the meeting without having to worry about taking notes. I find that when you're just dropping the eye contact, you know, I just find these little things just take away something from that relationship. And as I say, these usually at the beginning of a life cycle, so they're actually quite important to build that rapport with the client. So what do I use to record them? Well, as much as I'd love to rock up with one of these retro bad boys, there's actually lots of iOS and Mac options out there that let you type notes and record audio together. These three are particularly good ones. However, I tried these and apps like them, and my notes were better, but it was still a little awkward. I had to have some kind of device open, which again, just didn't feel right, didn't feel very organic, and I'm still not giving them 100% attention. So personally, I tend to go for a standard handheld digital recorder, preferably one with a really, really short, punchy name, such as this. That's really its name. You can check that on Amazon. I don't use that one. It's just a funny name. But seriously, any digital recorder would do absolutely fine. Some clients, when you talk about audio recording meetings, they're going to get a little funny. It's understandable. It's not really commonplace. They will make a comment about, will it be used against me in court? And they will say, will it appear on YouTube? Pretty standard. But generally, if you explain that, why you want to do it and the fact that your intentions are good, that you want to capture everything, and you absolutely promise to be discreet and private with it, generally most clients are pretty okay with it, and they forget it's even there within 2 minutes. So now for a client meeting tip that's a little bit more experimental. This is experimental because it comes with some warnings. Okay? If you use this approach with the wrong client, or even with the right client in the wrong tone, it could backfire a little bit. But screw the rich, right? What do I mean by no bullshit meeting talk? I'm talking about taking a break from the norm when it comes to talking in meetings. So when you hear phrases like this, we could do that, but. I see where you're coming from, but. I agree with you, but. And that's interesting feedback, but. I don't know about you, but when I hear these kind of phrases in meetings, I kind of roll my eyes a little bit, hopefully secretly. I think it's getting less secretly as I get older. But with the amount of information that's being shared these days, people, especially the younger generation, I think are becoming so much more cynical and wise to what I think this is, and that's like a politician's approach. How often do we believe what they say in general? Whenever I hear this kind of talk in meetings, all I see in my mind is Lumberg from Office Space. That's it, every time. I really think it's time to start taking a break from this and start making straight talking the new sort of standard for client meetings. I think it's time to start selling directness as a differentiator. If you've got to pussyfoot around your clients in meetings, I just wonder if that relationship is quite right, And let's face it, managing clients is so much easier when you can be direct, and likewise when they can be direct with you. Educating clients. Again, lots and lots of resources out there about educating clients. But when I became a client, it was, I was so surprised at how difficult I found it. After all, don't forget, I'd spent 8 years delivering web projects. I knew the terminology, I knew the processes, I knew the politics that could be involved, I knew the pitfalls. There wasn't much about, especially this particular project, that I hadn't done quite a few times before. And so I dread to think what it's like for a client who's got no prior experience with delivering digital projects. And again, it's not something I really thought about before. I think Matt Griffin sums it up perfectly in an article he published back in June on The List Apart, when he said, when you step into the room with a client, you are a visitor from the future. You, web professional, spend your days immersed in the new paradigms of the multi-device web. Yet even for you, the constant change and adjustments that come with living on the internet can feel overwhelming. So how do you think your clients feel? If I think back critically over times I've worked with non-web savvy clients, yes, I delivered the projects. Yes, they tended to end up pretty happy. But factoring in the experience I had as a client with all the experience I had, I don't think I was doing as good a job as I could have been. I really don't. I think I could have done a much better job by educating the client a bit more on digital. I think we take for granted what we know sometimes. So what are the main things I'd cover? I'd explain digital project management and processes, but in detail. In many proposals, there'll be a paragraph or two about what methodology you use to deliver a project, agile fail, waterfall, whatever it might be. That the PM might even meet the client in the pre-sales, but that's generally it. But I think we should go a lot further than that. I really think we should present your project management process, the whole thing, okay? Not only does that scream of professionalism, but at that early stage of a project, it really sets out the expectations for both parties, which can only be a good thing. And I'm not talking about tacking this on to another meeting, which I think does happen sometimes. I'm talking about setting up a dedicated meeting with all the key stakeholders and with as much importance on this as, say, a kick-off meeting or any of the other ones that include all the big boys. For example, cover the whole project lifecycle, requirements gathering, design, specification, development, right through to sign-off. If you're agile, whatever you're doing, go through it in detail, okay? But don't stop there. I really think you should also go through the common project issues. I think in early stages of the relationship, we tend to veer away from anything negative, but I think that's a mistake. Okay? These are business people. They'll have common pitfalls in their own business as well. I think it's time to start talking about these, talk about scope creep, iteration limits, reasons for project stalling. You could even bust out the pick any two conundrum from fast, cheap or good, or maybe even the classic project management triple constraints triangle. This one's probably a little bit dull to be talking to clients about in a meeting, to be fair. So I would suggest if you're going to do it, liven it up a little bit with one of life's greatest things. Okay? It's still a triangle, and already I'm way more interested. Pizza. Talking of takeaways. Why not create a project process manual that you can give your client to take away? Not only is that good for pre-sales, okay, but it will have a nice description of what is involved in moving into each project phase. So you're going into each phase in the project, they can have a little flick through and see roughly what's to be expected of them, what the pitfalls are, so on and so on. It's just a nice little thing. So, going through specification phase, they can see what's expected of them, what happens if it doesn't get back in time, content delivery, we all know that's always a problem, so emphasise that. Try and minimise these things. Design iterations, of course, can always go a little hairy. And each time a client finds a gap in this manual, just update it for the benefit of the next one. But design iterations, wow. From the client's perspective, I've got to make some more confessions. First one, I was an absolute nightmare client when it came to design. And you know what? I didn't give a crap about iteration limits. Didn't care. During the design phase of the project I'm talking about, we were burning through iterations pretty quickly. Okay, and this was a very design-led project more than technical, so it was very important to us. And we were burning through at such a rate that the PM in me knew this was too much. Okay, I knew it was getting a little bit silly, but I didn't care. As a client, I didn't care, and that was so surprising to me because I knew, well, I cared about the PM involved. I was asking how they were doing. I knew they'd have some boss probably breathing down their neck. I cared about the agency spending money because, again, I've been there. And when you're stuck in a kind of stalemate, it's really worrying for your budgets. But each time we got an iteration back and it wasn't quite what we wanted, I was getting frustrated. I was getting really frustrated, and again, at the same time, really surprised. Because I remember when I was just on the agency side, I would be quite baffled at why a client would get funny about giving me more money when we'd already hit, say we'd do 5 rounds of design, we'd done 8 and we still haven't hit it, can I have some more money please? They wouldn't be happy with that, and it was just a simple logic thing for me back then. But when I was a client, it was little nuances like what is defined as a quality iteration. We paid for a service, we paid for the design phase, we haven't got enough progress that we thought we'd get throughout that phase, so we're not going to pay any more. I mean, these words, I'm ashamed to say these words, but that's what I was thinking, and it's just very unusual. From the agency's point of view, There's a quote. I know Sam found this hard, as he is definitely a perfectionist and found it hard to be on the outside of this process. This led to a certain degree of pixel pushing and numerous iterations. Being very nice to me there. That's a certain degree. It was ridiculous. It was too much. Okay, it was too much. But I can't help feeling that this is a really good example of constant client and agency frustration that could be so helped with a bit more dedication to the education at the beginning of that cycle. You know, we talk about it in contracts, but that's about it. I think it's really time to explain it early on, why it's so hard to hit design. You know, explain to the client that you may not always be able to do it. Set that expectation early. It makes the conversation later a lot easier. Which leads on to why I also think it's an idea to explain your agency processes in detail. Think about it. When we start working with a new client, we dive into their world. We literally invade their business. We want to know everything there is to know about that client's world. We want to know the growth plans, the brand guidelines, the current technical implementation, the legacy systems, what their technical plans are. We want to know everything, absolutely everything. Why do we do this? Well, it's simply because we think if we get as much information as possible, we can give the best possible solution. I.e., we want to become the best possible supplier for that client. But I think this can work in reverse. You know, get the client understanding your business. You know, talk to them about the operational side, the challenges that are involved in running a digital agency, so that they can become the best client for you. You know, talk to them about things we don't normally do. Perhaps, I mean, maybe some of you do, but a lot of people don't. Talk to them about the fact you have other clients. Talk about why you don't launch on Fridays. Talk about when you do your weekly schedulings. You know, so for instance, if you're doing your scheduling on a Friday for the following week, if you explain to every client that if they get back to you on a Wednesday or a Thursday, there's much more chance you can accommodate that change the following week than if they get back to you on a Friday or a Monday. Explain that to all your clients. It should help make for a much better relationship. Really get them involved in your business and stop sort of keeping them out. But all this talk of educating a client, it sounds a bit like an onboarding process for a new starter, right? Which brings me on to my next point, which is to manage clients like your team. I think this is something us project managers should do an awful lot more. What do I mean by this? Well, many moons ago, when I first started managing, I was speaking to a mentor of mine. Here's me. Here's my mentor. And I was having a right old whinge about my team. Okay, specifically how some of them weren't up to scratch. There I am, wow, my team, wow, still going. Went on for quite much longer than this, actually. He didn't say anything. He just sat there, let me finish. And once I finished, he said, I see. So what are you going to do about it? And I was like, what? You know, I mean, this guy's rubbish, that girl's not great. I was quite confused at the time. And then he really hit me with it. He said, if your team are failing, then you're failing as their manager. At the time, I wasn't really happy with that explanation. But a few minutes later, I kind of realised what being a good line management, you know, I think the same philosophy should be extended to client management. Quite simply, I think that if a client's failing, then you're failing, okay? While it's hard to stomach, and perhaps in many cases bordering on the unfair, I just think if you stick to this philosophy, which is a good line management philosophy, your energy and focus is going to be on trying to fix situations as opposed to putting up defences and who to blame, okay? Clients late with content, you've got choices. You can bitch about it, swear behind their back, or you can try and help them out. You know, start with the mentality that you're being paid to deliver this project, to make it go smoothly, and manage the client who's going through a really tough ordeal. And I can really testify to that. So treat them like one of your team. You know, what do you do when a team member is struggling? You find out what's wrong. You see what you can do to help them. You support them all the way through. You drag them over the finishing line, and everyone's better for it at the end. Okay? So treat them like one of your team, but never at the expense of your actual team. I'm really hyper-aware in a room full of PMs that I'm being very pro-client here, okay? But never compromise your team for a client, okay? That's just going to cause so much pain for everybody involved. If you start favouring your client over your team, for example, one example, accepting crap decisions from a client, just passing it down the chain for them to do without really challenging it, guess what? They're going to hate you, okay? The speed and the quality of their work is going to be substandard. The client's going to see that and be unhappy. Your boss will probably see it and be unhappy. Your team are unhappy. Trust me, you're going to be unhappy. No one's winning there. If you're going to do that, I think spend the time with your team. Show them the respect they deserve. You know, there's nothing that annoys me more, and I've heard it a few times in my career, and it really, excuse the language, pisses me off, when I hear someone say that don't tell the designers or developers that they don't care or they wouldn't understand. Okay, I've heard that a few times. That really annoys me. It's so patronising. These are smart people we're talking about here. What they really want is for you to sit down with them and explain why you want them to do this really crap thing. All right, we've all done it. I'm sure we've all had to pass down an order that's crap. We know it's crap, we've fought it, we've lost, we've got to ask the guys to do it, and it's a horrible situation to be in. But just spend the time explaining why you've made that decision. It's usually a commercial reason, and just spend the time explaining to them. And what you're really looking for is for these very smart people to simply say, do you know what, now I know all the factors, I think in his shoes I'll probably do the same thing. Okay? That will help you massively when working with teams. But also, when a client's insisting you do something that you know is crap, and hopefully you've told them it's not a great idea, and you've explained why, and they're still pushing it, think about why they're doing that. Again, not something I thought of until I became a client. I just thought, they're not listening, whatever, just one of those clients. Think about what's going on their side, okay? It could very well be because of what a client's day is like, okay? In short, pretty damn grueling, I'll tell you. I've already talked about how many of them don't get dedicated time for projects. But something else I never really thought about is that they don't get to walk away after this. They don't get to leave the company. They have to work with the same people on the results of our project. And they've got to work with these same people. And if they're working on a high exposure project, like, for instance, the redesign of a company website, their reputation's on the line, whether they like it or not. Okay? It's a really high exposure. All eyes at the company are on this person, and some of them have got something in abundance. That's opinions, okay? And lots of them. And they are more than willing to generously share those opinions. This was never more prevalent when I was the client than when I had some designs on my screen, or I was populating content on the staging environment, whatever. It was like moth to a light bulb. I suddenly had 5, 6 people. Before they weren't that interested, got something on my screen to look at. They're around there, and they shared their feedback, and they didn't mince their words. And most of them weren't over there to give me a pat on the back. So they spoke up, and it hurt a little. I'll be quite honest, it hurt a little. Here I was giving blood, sweat, and tears. I was working weekends, evenings. I was really passionate about this project. Coming to work and getting negative feedback from my colleagues, and I laughed it off. I explained to them why, perhaps why they didn't like it. And ultimately, the project might not have been for them. The goals of the project weren't necessarily to please them. There were other goals. I knew it was hitting them, but they didn't like it. But I laughed it off. But the point is, it stung. It really stung. And I think that we have to remember that clients rarely have a team around them to help them when we're managing projects for them. They're often just taking orders from the higher echelons in their company, and they're usually alone. It took an awful lot of strength to push on, I can tell you that. In fact, it took the strength of a bear. It really did. I'd never considered that unless I'm dealing directly with the CEO of a company, I'm actually going to be putting my client in a position where they're probably going to have to argue with their boss on multiple occasions. Okay? They need to be very, very strong to bosses, and that's not an easy thing to do. Scenarios like explaining to your boss why an idea might not be too great, or the agency want to charge more and the boss won't, or the agency want more time and the boss won't let you. There's loads more examples, but just imagine how you'd feel walking up to your boss, once or twice a week for 6 months with problems, and it's you alone. It's a really tough position to be in. In fact, I think most of you out there would much rather be this kind of bear. But please, as project managers, where you can, help the clients out, okay? And always try to make the client look good. This is a really top tip for client management, okay? Do your best to make your primary contact look good, even if they're not that great, It's just a really good, ethical and worthwhile approach to providing a good service. If you make your primary contact look good, they're going to absolutely love you for it, And with the amount of feathers they're going to have to ruffle along the way, they're going to really appreciate this. And you know what? They're going to want to keep working with you, as opposed to somebody else. So if you can do this, it's just going to benefit everybody. And you know what? This is one of the ways that I've seen a lot of one-off projects actually turn into accounts, when you can just focus on that philosophy. So managing expectations. What we're really talking about when we say managing expectations, what we're talking about is avoiding bad surprises. For example, imagine you're about to launch your client's shiny new website, and you decide to show them how the budget's looking. If they react like this, I would have to say you probably haven't done the best of jobs in managing expectations. But don't forget, I love seeing that big, but don't forget, as project managers, managing expectations is not just for clients, okay? I really believe it's our job to also manage expectations of your boss, your internal stakeholders, and also your project team. Okay? But how? How do you do this? Well, I'm going to tell you how I do it. It's not the only way. It's just my way. Okay? It's a quite simple technique, but it's taken years and years and years to master. It's quite complex to explain. I actually wonder whether this was the right forum to try and explain it. But I'm going to give it a go. So if you bear with me, you ready? I know, it's mind-blowing, right? Absolutely mind-blowing. You're all trying to work out how I came up with this. But seriously, guys, seriously, just be bloody honest, you know? Too many people that manage clients and teams prefer to avoid being totally honest and say something closer to what the person wants to hear. And the reason they're doing that is to avoid a tricky conversation, okay? The truth is, I understand it. I get it. It's easier to tell a client that everything's fine when it's not. It's easier to say on a Friday at 5 PM that it's all on track when you know you've just had a massive delay on the week. You know, I understand it. And it can appear to have worked. Client goes away happy, team goes away happy. You know, everyone's okay. But in my experience, it tends to backfire almost every time, okay? I found if you're just bloody honest all of the time, right from day one, okay, the client really, really appreciates that. Not only do they end up respecting you for having the balls to be honest, but it shows you've got integrity. And that integrity builds trust. And that trust is the most critical factor in a client relationship. I think Gandhi nailed it when he said, a no uttered from the deepest conviction is better than a yes, merely uttered to please, or worse, to avoid trouble. Damn right, Gandhi, he's my man. But for those of you that don't trust Gandhi, think he's a little bit dodgy, I found a much better source of evidence than this. And that's Twitter. So I gave this part of the talk in a presentation last year with Brett, and a few days later I got a tweet from a guy called Rob Mills. Some of you might know him. Really nice guy, and he said, Sam, your advice to be honest has paid off today. The whole project team agreed it's beneficial to all to push launch back a few days. I checked, does that include the client? He said, yeah, I raised some concerns how a change would result in delayed launch. Honest and friendly chat resulted in agreement. What I liked about this little bit of feedback was that Rob is a smart and nice guy. No way before he saw this part of my talk would he have lied to the client. Wouldn't have happened. But it's clear he wouldn't have had just a very blunt and honest conversation, okay? There's no way, you know, it really is the stress-free approach, and it feels weird, I get it. It feels weird to try it, but just give it a go, okay? What I also like about this tweet is, you see that? That little thing you probably can't make out to. Well, that's actually Brett Harned. Okay, and he's favourited a tweet that he's not involved in. It's nothing to do with him. I think I might have a bit of a problem there. I'm joking, of course. I couldn't have him come all the way over here and not troll him a little bit. We're, of course, the absolute best of friends. Okay? However, when it comes to being honest, just be warned. Apparently, it's possible to be a little too honest. As a boss once said of mine. He said, Sam, you have about as much tact as being hit in the face with a brick. Great. Okay. So now for something a little bit more practical when it comes to managing expectations. That's weekly reports from day one. So all too often, we have a nice plan, nice budget in the proposal at the beginning, and it's all lovely and shiny. And before we know it, work starts, we're knee-deep in shit after 6 weeks, so we've done 1 million things, and we've got 20 million things left to do, and we probably haven't communicated, you know, the launch that's 6 months away or budget or whatever. It's too busy a time, okay, and it doesn't matter, it's over there. But I think this is a really big mistake, okay? I've done it myself, and this is why I do this now. One of the most effective ways I found to manage client expectations is providing this with a weekly report from day one, okay? And it doesn't have to be a novel. I know a lot of people write a lot of reports, we all probably think we write too many. It doesn't have to be a novel, okay? It's best kept really simple and consistent. For example, it's very similar to Brett's, funnily enough, very, very similar. So we'll go through it really quickly. What was done this week? What will be done next week? Just nice, simple progress indicators, you know, progress and plans. Blockers and issues, we'll come back to that, but that's obviously anything that's stopping the project from going smoothly, okay? Revised project timeline. This is where it gets interesting. So Brett mentioned in his talk that PMs are afraid of being seen as a robot. In fact, in certain other areas of our world, you know, some in designers, developers, whatever it might be, project managers are seen as the process monkeys. We just like process. We just do it for the sake of it, okay? We're not even needed in some cases. So when you come to send this over on week 1, week 2, and nothing's changed on the timeline, it's still the same, hopefully no blockers and issues that early, you kind of get that feeling that you're being a bit of a robot. You're being a bit dogmatic, and you're tempted to not send it because what's the point, right? It's just, it seems a waste of time. It's a waste of their time, your time, and so on. But the minute there's an issue with a project and it appears on this report, and they see that timeline change, okay? And what we're talking about here is launch ultimately. The minute they see that launch is moved, the whole world stops, okay? And it stops, you know, because not only does the client start to create the bond between an issue will create a delay, but it also sets that expectation that you will push back launch if they're late with something, okay? And it's never a nice thing to do. And one of the things that people will often do is, especially in the early days of a project, is they won't tell the client there's been a delay because they'll think they can make up the time later on. Sometimes you can, but when you can't and you're 2/3 of the way into the project or even later and you need more time, that's a really difficult conversation if the client has no idea that you've slipped at all. Okay, so I say, again, it's all back to the being honest. The minute something's going wrong, let everybody know this is a business after all. And it's the same with revised project budget. Again, week 1, you send it over, brilliant, 99%. Week 2, 98.5. It kind of seems pointless. But as you're going through the project, if you're suddenly seeing 50% and yet you know you're nowhere near 50% of the way through, that's a really good trigger to have that conversation with the client about what's happened. The whole point of this, doing it from day 1, is that you don't leave it till the end. You don't leave it too late to have a conversation. As I said, I learned the hard way. I've got to the end of projects and I need more money and we need more time. First question's asked, well, why? Where did this, what happened? What went wrong? You know, so on and so on. And even though I know there's really solid reasons behind it, I can't articulate that quickly. There's so much, and a lot of it's snowballed. This is a really good way to keep track of what's going on. And ultimately, when you get 2/3 of the way through a project, there's no surprises. The clients, they've just had an evolving set of news throughout the entire life cycle, okay? So there's no surprises. I'd also recommend you send this to your bosses and your teams as well, internally, okay? It's really interesting when maybe someone on the production team is a bit sloppy, makes a mistake. It's difficult sometimes. You think they don't really understand what impact that has, but the conversations you need to have because of that. If they know that their mistake will be on here and it will cause a problem when it's going to the boss, the client, and the rest of the company, it just gives a bit more exposure to how important it is to do quality work. But seriously, that's a really big one for me. Dealing with mega beasts. So, what on earth is a mega beast, I hear you ask? Well, I thought an image might help here. I searched on Flickr, but there are only 3 results, unfortunately, one being this. Now, while both that lady and myself would indeed call that beast mega, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about are really, really crappy clients, okay? You know the kind that seem to always want to Hulk smash you, no matter what you do, okay? You try every tactic in the book, you try everything, you're nice, you're nasty, you're firm, you do everything you can, but no matter what, you use Occam's razor, you just think, this person must have been sent from the bowels of hell to torment me, right? There's no other explanation. And to be honest, you can find mega beasts in all walks of life, colleagues, friends, family, doesn't really matter. So how do you deal with them? Well, there's several ways. Here's one way to deal with mega beasts. As satisfying as that is, I really don't recommend it. From my experience, it's never really panned out too well. It feels really good though. There is, however, another way. That's the right way. I learned this from a colleague of mine. So to set the scene, we're going through a really tough time at work, you know, in what seems like the 50th horrible meeting with a Hulk smashing mega beast. And I'm pumped up, I'm ready for this meeting, I'm gonna win this time. So there I go into the meeting, I've got my FU face on, you know, I'm fighting passionately for this cause, I'm really gonna go for it. I'm in with my colleague, I'm fuming. I looked over at my colleague who I know feels the same as me. I assume he's gonna have the same FU face. No, he looked like this, okay? He had this calm, peaceful look, and he had a little smile. It was very, very weird. Well, anyway, I didn't have time to talk to him there, so I turned back into the meeting and I upped my intensity levels. I was really cross now, right? I'm going crazy, I'm going to win. But each time I'm getting knocked back, and the sound of the mega beast voice is making my blood boil, you know, I think we all know someone like that. I looked over at my colleague, he's definitely going to be going apeshit now. He's not going to be happy at this, there's no way. Was he? No, of course not. Same smile, same content look on his face. I turned away. I didn't know what to make of it. It was very bizarre. I was getting paranoid. What am I missing? After the meeting, I was going to find out. So I walked up to him. I said, how do you do that? And he said, how do you do what? And I said, how do you stay so calm? And he just looked at me, same look on his face. Really, it was quite annoying. And he replied, just do the right thing. No matter what, just keep doing the right thing, and it will all be okay in the end. And it just floored me. You know, their philosophy completely floored me. It's so simple. And I can honestly say that I've adopted that ever since, and I can testify to its power. So when I'm dealing with a mega beast now, I am like, well, not that happy, okay? I'm not quite that happy, but I'm not as angry, okay? I think Sun Tzu, when he said about a wise general, had it right when he said he wins his battles by making no mistakes. Making no mistakes is what establishes the certainty of victory, for it means conquering an enemy that is already defeated. I give him a little PMP honorary qualification there. He's quite clever. But my advice is to just always do the right thing, okay? By resisting the urge to retaliate and stoop to the mega beast level, which is what they want, no matter how much of a temptation there is and it's strong, it means that you remain the professional one. You can never be accused of anything. You're always on solid moral ground. You gain respect for not reacting, and that's a big one. People start seeing you not reacting, and they see the difference in the people. It exposes the problem in the right way, okay? It takes some time, it takes a lot of patience, okay? An inordinate amount of patience sometimes. But if you keep doing the right thing, the problem always comes out in the end. And a real nice little byproduct of all this is it really pisses the mega beast off, which is, who doesn't want that, right? So, just one more thing I want to talk to you about. And this is the best way you guys have of improving how you deal with clients. Always, always, always get client feedback and drop your phone. I've talked to you about how I personally like to manage clients and the invaluable lessons I learned when I became a client. But not everyone gets that chance, okay? But you do all have access to clients. So if you really want to get an insight into what it's like to be a client, more specifically, what it's like to be a client managed by you, well, once your project is complete, ask them, you know? And don't just get feedback from an agency website testimonial. Ask them for brutal feedback, okay? Explain to them why you want to know. Explain you want to get better. Once they hear that, most clients are more than happy to give you that feedback. And when you get that feedback, really listen, learn, and change, okay? Really do it. Which is why, when my project ended, I just couldn't resist it. I asked the poor project manager who had to manage me what I was like as a client. This is what she had to say. Sam, it was great working with you, and I learned a lot. Of course, definitely. However, shit. In the nicest possible way, you were a pain in the arse. I really was. I really was a bad client. I think that PM is here today, is that right? There she is. Hey, Sean. Sorry for being a pain in the arse. But so, you know, come on, guys. I mean, what I'm really getting at is don't jump to conclusions about clients, okay? Let's make a real effort to help them, because I'm telling you, it is nowhere near as easy as you think it is. Nowhere near. I really hope that some of you have enjoyed what I learned on my journey. And what I really want you to take away is to think about your clients in a new way, okay? Empathise with them. Educate them on how they work rather than lambast them for not knowing. Help them out when they're struggling. Talk to them more openly, more honest, and with a lot more respect, and learn from them, okay? So that you're constantly improving. Because by doing so, I really think that together we can start to change clients' faces from this to this. Thank you.